Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Bill Schindler is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first appearance on episode 14, and more recently on episodes 223 and 408 of Boundless Body Radio. Dr. Bill Schindler is an archaeologist who's traveled to every corner of the globe to learn about our human roots. In his travels, Dr. Schindler has learned that our current industrialized food system is vastly different than what we have eaten as a species for millions of years. His much anticipated book, Eat Like a Human, Nourishing Foods and Ancient Ways of Cooking to Revolutionize Your Health, was published in 2021. His goal is to help his readers find and prepare food that is as nutrient dense as possible. Bill and his lovely wife, Christina, who was also hosted on our show on episode 486, also operate the incredibly successful Modern Stone Age Kitchen, a foodery that optimizes nutrition in modern foods based on the approaches they developed to nourish their family. Dr. Schindler also founded the Eastern Shore Food Lab, which has now become an autonomous nonprofit and offers immersive classes on a range of topics, including cheese making, sourdough bread making, nose-to-tail butchering, and cooking, fermenting, and foraging. Dr. Bill Schindler, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
It is such a pleasure to be here, Casey. Thank you for having me again.
You are such a stud. Thank you so very much for being a four-time guest on our show. As we mentioned in the intro, also hosted your lovely wife, Christina. She was an amazing, amazing guest. So awesome that I've been able to meet you in person. I've now seen you at two different health conferences, which was absolutely fantastic to meet you in person. Have you signed this lovely copy of my book, Eat Like a Human?
I see it right there.
I absolutely love. And it was awesome to meet you. Again, just such a stud. But meeting Christina, like, okay, now I realize who the star of the show is.
Oh, 100%. She is the star of the show. And we met a while ago. We've been married 23 years, and my entire life changed when she came into my life in every single way. I mean, not, all the ways that you can imagine and all the things that we're doing now. But even then, I mean, I don't even think I'd have graduated college if it wasn't for her. So she's amazing, absolutely amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was really bummed out. So I was traveling in from the conference, staying with relatives up in Evergreen, so up in the mountains of Denver. And it was very, very cold that night. I don't know if you remember, it got down to zero, at least where I was. And so I was able to get my car down the driveway at night to where I needed to go, but I couldn't get it out the next morning. So I was late. So I missed like the first 15 minutes of your presentation. I was so bummed about it. It was a wonderful presentation, the part that I was able to catch, which is great. But then at KetoCon, it was awesome because I got to see the two of you on stage. And I've never seen her present. She's just as dynamic as you are.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, and I don't know if everyone knows this, but she was the director of special ed at several different counties. She's been presenting not on these topics for as long, but she's taken the stage at incredible conferences, academic conferences all over the country, and for a very long time. So it's really nice to get her back on stage and for us to do it together. And we just spoke at the Weston Price conference last weekend, and it went really well. So we're looking forward to a lot more of that.
That's so cool. She is definitely ride or die. Before I jumped onto this call, I made sure to watch the video again. It's like my favorite video this year of you guys cutting open the cheese from one of your last trips, opening it up. Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of your recent trips. We're going to talk about the blue zones, but I want to mention that video in particular. So tell us a little bit about the cheese you guys were eating. And I just have to preface that by saying her reaction to all of it is just priceless.
Okay, so let me even back up a little further first to lay the context, because it's very important. So when Christina and I first met, she was a vegetarian. I think she may have even spoke about that with you before. And she loves cheese. She's loved cheese her entire life, but the cheese she was eating are the typical kinds of cheeses that a modern American would be eating. Cheddar is kind of an aged cheddar is kind of getting, pushing the envelope a little bit. So, but she does love cheese. The animal thing came later, and part of it was she was at a restaurant as a kid in Pennsylvania, one of these Pennsylvania Dutch restaurants and kind of family style things. And actually she got very sick from eating some kind of meat that was there. And wow. She just had that association, as you do, a flavor, a smell of something, so she didn't eat meat for decades. And then she started craving it again when she was pregnant. And anyhow, now she'll full bore. She's eating liver. She's eating steaks next to me. I mean, truly fantastic. But some of the more fringe things that I love, she's open to, but it's a step, right? It's certainly a step. So what you're referring to is just a few months ago when we were in Sardinia. But let me back up just a little bit more and I think this makes it even more special that she had that cheese with me a few months ago. So I used to train at and then later teach at the Italian Culinary Institute in Calabria. And one time we were there as a family about 6 years ago. We realized I knew I had family in Sicily, and I also had families in Campania, not terribly far from Naples, and this little village on top of a mountain. And we said, let's jump in the car. We're in Southern area. Let's jump in the car and go visit them. Literally, none of them spoke English, and I speak zero Italian. And Christina's like, "Oh, we're fine because we have, we have the app, we have the Google Translator, what have you." And at the time, that app only worked when you had the internet. So anyhow, we end up on the top of this mountain, and very long story short, because I don't want to belabor the point, but we end up meeting this family, our relatives, and there was zero. We couldn't communicate at all because there was no signal, there was no internet, and finally, at one point, I saw that he had piles of wood, and I'm thinking maybe he's got a wood-fired oven. We had just built a wood-fired oven in our backyard. We can kind of connect over this. So I was pointing to the wood, and he looks at me. He goes, "Meat? You want meat?" And I'm like, "Sure, I want meat, but that's not why I'm pointing to the wood. But meat, I'll get you meat." So he throws me and my son in the car. We drive down the mountain to this butcher. The butcher actually happened to have spent 5 years in Canada, so she spoke English. She started translating. We started talking, and anyhow, I told him I was a cheesemaker. We started talking about cheese, and he told me he had his own animals that he milked and all this. And I'm like, "That's great." He makes his cheese. So we go back, and as soon as we got back, my wife Christina grabs me. She pulls me in the back. She's like, "Look, he does have a wood-fired oven." And he grabs me. He goes, "Come on." And he takes me back to his shed. He opens these doors, and there's just wheels of cheese everywhere, and they're all crawling with maggots. They're covered with maggots. So he actually made the Casumarzu, this incredibly famous cheese. Guinness Book of World Records several years ago called it the most dangerous cheese in the world. It's just the most ridiculous thing on the planet. But anyhow, it's there, and you can eat this cheese one of two ways. And you want the bugs in there because that's part of the process of making the cheese. So you could either eat it covered, crawling with all these maggots, or you can wait until the maggots turn into flies or whatever they turn into, and they fly away, and then you can eat the cheese then. But it's a completely different cheese at that point because of a couple of reasons. But they were covered in these crawling things. So we grabbed the kids, we pulled them in, and he's scooping pieces of this out. I mean, every bit he's scooping out is covered with these crawling maggots. Everybody in the family had a taste of it. And you couldn't say no. I mean, there was no way to say no. I didn't want to say no anyhow, but nobody had an option of saying no. So that was that. Now, fast forward. I didn't even know anybody even made Casumarzu outside of Sardinia. It's traditional Sardinian cheese. I knew that I wanted to try some while we were in Sardinia, sit down and properly do it, not just have a piece, because to sit down and properly do it. And we sorted out, it's actually illegal. This cheese is illegal. And in fact, if you get caught transporting it, it's like something silly, like 40,000 euro fine. I don't know what it is, something insane. Wow. So we managed to source some. We got it and put it on a table, and that's the video you're referring to. So I will tell you, it was impressive that she had some. It's even more impressive that she's already had some and she was okay trying it again.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. That's okay. That's crazy. So again, her reaction, especially when you open it up to the smell, it looked like it was a very strong flavor, but it didn't really seem like that had anything to do with the maggots themselves. Is that true?
Well, it does sort of. And what happens is, let me just back up for a minute. So if anybody eats, and I'll kind of put it in context, anybody listening to this and thinking, "Whoa, maggot cheese, what are you talking about? Like, this isn't even my wheelhouse." Think about this. Anyone who's ever had brie or camembert, for example, when you make that cheese, you start the same. You get the milk fermenting, you put rennet in there, and you cut curds, and then you drain them, and you have this cheese. It's sitting there fermenting. The reason it's soft on the inside is because there's a bacteria that's on the outside. That white rind on the outside is actually literally eating the cheese from the outside in and digesting it, and it's what's turning it soft. Right, that process is turning it soft. In this particular case, with the Casumarzu, with these maggots, those maggots are, so what they do is typically when you're making cheese, you don't want bugs on your cheese. But in this case, there's something about this cheese that attracts flies anyhow. And then the cheese maker makes little divots on the top of it so that there's a place for these particular kind of flies to lay their eggs right on top of the cheese. And then the eggs hatch and you have maggots, maggot-like things. And these maggots go through the cheese and they digest the cheese kind of like, the way I think about it is like an earthworm going through the soil. Like it's going in one end and coming out the other end. A little bit different, a little bit change. It's good for the farmer. It's good for the crops. This changes the cheese. And one of the things that changes is that the insects begin to break down the fats in the cheese. And that creates a different texture, but also a completely different odor. And the thing I can compare that to is there's an enzyme called lipase, which in provolone cheese is responsible for that really strong provolone smell and flavor. So if you think about like the strongest provolone, like, provolone picante, like the strongest provolone you've ever had in your life, that smell, and then multiply it by 1 billion, that's what you're getting with this cheese, because it's going through that digestive process from the maggots.
Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, I wouldn't have thought to ask you this question, but Dr. Chafee did, so I'm stealing his question to ask you: better with the maggots or better without?
I've never had it without. I don't know.
Oh, there you go.
I don't know.
Gotcha. Okay, I thought you can serve it without, right? The taste would be about the same. It just they wouldn't have the maggots on there. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, and the other thing that I understand, and again, I haven't had it without, but we're talking, several weeks longer of this cheese sitting. The maggots all turn into flies, they fly away, and that cheese is also dehydrated a little bit because there's some of the moisture is left. So I believe the texture is a little firmer, a little bit different, by that point. The other thing, and I think I mentioned this to Anthony, but I know that I wrote about it in the blog recently. We immediately think food that's covered in bugs, dangerous, bad, unhealthy, whatever, or gross, if nothing else. But the reality is, one of the cool things, when I talk to people that make this cheese and eat this cheese on a regular basis, but do it as a part of life, the presence of those maggots, and those maggots being super healthy and wiggling around, the same thing that would gross anybody out or anybody else out, they look at it and say, oh, that means that cheese is actually still good. Like that cheese hasn't gone bad. It's crawling with these, the bugs haven't died. The bugs aren't sick. The bugs are sitting there consuming this cheese every second. They're doing great. And that is one of the things they look at as an indicator that the cheese itself is actually still good too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wish I didn't have such an aversion to that kind of thing. I would hope that I would sit there along with you and taste it. I might chicken out, but I love hearing the stories. I'm so glad she's willing to do that kind of stuff with you. I mentioned stealing a question from Dr. Chafee. I've stolen more than that. I actually stole a portion of your interview with him, with his permission, to include in an episode we did a few weeks ago. That was a composite episode taken from lots of different guests talking about the blue zones. I'm sure you're aware that on Netflix, there's a trending documentary that just came out called Live to 100, The Secrets of the Blue Zones. And it's all about these 5 magical areas around the planet where people live longer. And the message is really pretty awesome. Like, these people live long lives. They have great community. They're included with the grandkids. They help raise the kids, and they participate. And people love the elderly, and they stay active. They're up and down all the time, and they eat a 90 to 98% plant-based diet. We see in Sardinia, where you just were, they're eating pots of minestrone soup all the time, and that's what they eat. And that's what is being told to people. And you listen to interviews with Dan Buettner, and he's asked, like, of these 9 pillars that you talk about, which one is the most important? The number one thing all the time is a Blue Zones diet, quote unquote, branded Blue Zones diet, 90 to 98% plant-based. You can have 2 ounces of meat 5 times a month. You can have 12 eggs in the course of a month. And so you hear this message, and it's really enticing, and you see this beautiful documentary. And then I listen to you and other people from Okinawa and Costa Rica and all these other places that are like, we don't eat that way. That is not what happens. So it's this very interesting conflict. And since you have just been there, I just couldn't wait to get you back on to talk about your trip to Sardinia in particular. You were there for a very specific reason before you even knew that you were visiting a blue zone. So can you tell us all about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a trip this is one of those trips of a lifetime. It's so much so that we're going to start setting up this as a trip that we're offering for people to come with us. That we're running through our nonprofit as sort of a culture, history, prehistory, food tour. It was Sardinia is a magical place. I love Italy in general. We spent time in Sicily, but I've never been to Sardinia, and it was always one of those this magical island that I maybe now and then meet somebody from there, but it's been very, very rare. And we had the opportunity to go. In fact, it took me over 10 years to make the contacts that we needed to do the research that we were really looking for. And complete transparency, the main reason we went, that was the impetus for going to Sardinia, was because I was doing research on eggcorn, an ancient form of bread that was being made from acorns from oak trees, that Pliny the Elder wrote about, and has been around for a very long time. It took me 10 years to find a person that still knew how to make it, and I'm convinced that I found literally the last person. I found several years ago, I was able to identify 3 elderly women that still knew how to make it, but they were too elderly to show to make contact with, to go with. But one of their sons, who they taught, was the person we were with. That's a complete side note. The important thing is, and I've talked with you about it, I've talked on a lot of podcasts, I wrote about it. If you're eating vegetables, and Anthony Chafee would agree with this, if you're eating vegetables at all, you have to do something to them in almost all cases, because they all have some level of toxin in them. And what I was researching was one of the ancestral ways of detoxifying the tannic acid, getting it out of the acorns, or at least in a state that it isn't going to harm our body and we can still have access to the nutrition. And they make this really cool bread with a combination of clay and ash, and it's called panispelli. Anyhow, that's why we were going. When I finally was able to make those inroads, and I really looked into Sardinian food, I'm like, oh my God, this diet, the food they're making is absolutely brilliant. And the way that they, my passion in food and health and cooking is no-so-tail approaches to animals. And one of the main things that we do research on and try to and apply in our homes, and also in our Modern Stone Age kitchen here, the restaurant, is that lessons from traditional and ancestral approaches to animals that use the complete animal. So one of the things that I found was that there's here, home grab some.
If you're listening to this, I'll link the YouTube so you can watch this. This is always like my favorite part of these interviews, is the visual. So cool.
We always grab things, right? So this right here, for those of you who are just listening, can't see anything. This is the stomach of an unweaned goat. So that means it's a goat that's still drinking from its mother and getting all of its nutrition solely from its mother's milk. When we make cheese, and this is important to the larger conversation, so bear with me for 1 second. When we make cheese as a cheesemaker, all we're doing is replicating the natural biological processes that all infant mammals, including humans, go through when we're digesting milk inside of our bodies. But when we get weaned from our mothers, it could be a mouse, it could be a whale, it could be a donkey, it could be a human, we start to lose that ability to process that milk properly. So this stomach and that goat, if it's unweaned, has everything it needs, all of the enzymes, everything that's happening to make cheese without any interference from a human, or at least very minimal. So this is the most rudimentary form of cheese making. And this is kind of the second reason we went to Sardinia, so we could do this with shepherds in the mountains. You take the goat, and it's going to sound bad for a second, but bear with me. You have the goat drink from its mother, and then you kill the goat. You take the milk, or take the stomach out and tie the two ends, one's the in and one's the out, tie the two ends, and literally hang it up for 2 weeks. And 2 weeks later, you literally have cheese. It's all you have to do. The raw milk is in the process of fermenting. Internal component, digestive tract of the goat, especially in the stomach, has all the enzyme it needs, has a chymosin to start coagulating the milk. It all happens all on its own. And then 2 weeks later, you open it up and you can eat the cheese. If you thought the Casumarzu was strong, this stuff, which is called Caio de Cabreto, is out of this world strong.
Wow.
Crazy. Spreadable cheese. It's crazy. But here's the part that's awesome. We ate every part of that goat except for the skin and the feet. I mean, literally every part of that goat got consumed. And I'm sorry, and the contents of the large intestines. Everything else was consumed. The contents of the small intestines, the large intestines, the kidneys, heart, the liver, the spleen, the brains, the meat, the fat, all of it was consumed. That was my second experience eating in Sardinia. And we were in the heart. It was called, the village is Villa Grande. It was in the heart of the first identified blue zone in the world. And we had very similar experiences in the villages, Urzali and some of the other ones, all that are still in that same area, but outside of that central place. Meat, animals in several different forms were consumed on a regular basis. That was the reality of what we experienced there. In fact, if you looked at the percentage of animals versus plants that were consumed, it was probably the exact opposite, or damn close to what you mentioned earlier. Here's some really important takeaways. First off, and you started it off beautifully, the reality is there's no one thing that allows something as complex as a human to live longer. It isn't just diet. And if anybody suggests it's one thing, it'd be ridiculous. But the one thing that's easy to talk about, easy to get people to change, easy to make money off of, especially in the current, dietary landscape, is, let's go plant-based, and this is going to solve all the problems. There's a multitude. Everybody I talk to, what is it? What is it about your lifestyle that everybody's living so long and all this? And every one of them it's all sorts of things. But the first thing that came out of multiple people's mouths, and I said, okay, what's that really cliche? What's the secret? What's the secret to you guys living so long as you are? Almost everybody turned around and said, we're nice. Like literally, we're nice. That's it. We're nice. And they were incredibly nice and welcoming to each other, to us. Now, I'm sure, like, we were outsiders. We came in. I'm sure if we were there for 6 months, we'd start to see who's arguing with who and who's gossiping over. But in general, just incredible, welcoming, amazing, nice people. The other thing is that they always move. You would expect that if you went into a place that, the suggestion is these are some of the healthiest people on the planet that have the longest lifespan of anybody on the planet, you would expect, given our current ideas about how you achieve optimal health, you'd expect there to be gyms on every corner. Like literally, these people are walking around with their Nike bags and their water bottles and their really nice hookah shoes or whatever the hell, and going to the gym literally every second. There wasn't a gym around. Like, I didn't see one gym. And this isn't, I say the word village. It wasn't like there were huts and thatch roofs and things. I mean, this is a proper, I don't know if you call it a city, I don't know if you call it a huge town. I don't know, but it's on the side of a mountain. But there's streets everywhere, crazy, twisty, narrow streets, houses everywhere. I mean, lots of people were living here. I'm not saying there weren't any gyms. I didn't see any. So that was really interesting, but they didn't need them. They moved all the time. We just got done, and I know you listened to the interview, but one of the things I said, we drove, it took us hours and hours and hours to drive there. We flew into an airport in the southern part of Sardinia. And then it took us a very long time to get there. And the kids, everybody in the car was ready to throw up because it was the craziest windy roads up and down mountains and through valleys. It was crazy. We bottomed out at one time on a rental car, but that's another issue. But anyhow, we finally got there. All we wanted to do was get out of the car, either throw up or lay down. We were just about done. And the people we were meeting, first time I met them, came right up, let's go for a walk. Like a walk. And you look around and there's nowhere flat anywhere. So a walk really means a hike, but it really means a hike up and down a mountain, right? They're like, let's take a walk. Hours later, we returned from this walk, and that's what they do. They walk up and down a mountain, up and down a mountain, up and down these streets all day. They're walking, they're doing this, they're making this, but their bodies are always moving. The other thing that is incredibly interesting is that, and I really want to make this distinction between, lifespan, living to a certain age, dying to a certain age. I really feel like in this country and in places, in more of the kind of modern westernized world, when we talk about an age span or how long people are living, I really feel like the last 10, 20, 30 years of people's lives, of many people's lives, unfortunately, are going downhill very rapidly. And the quality of life just really isn't there. Are they alive? Are they breathing? Yes. But is the quality of life there? No. In many cases. There, not only were people living to these really incredibly, 100-year plus ages, they were mobile. Their minds were there. Their minds were sharp. They were smiling. They were moving around. I mean, and again, this is somewhat anecdotal because we weren't there for months on end, and we were with a limited amount of people. But what we observed from being there, the guy next to the house that we were staying in, with the family we were staying with, he was 100, I think 103 years old, something like this. Lived on the second floor of the house. There's no elevator. He lived completely by himself and was up and down the steps multiple times a day, carrying his groceries or carrying his food up and down and doing this, cooking for himself. I mean, that's the kind of, that was a really, the family that we were living with. The father of the house was 98, and he walked up and down the mountain every day, like every day. Wow. 98 years old. And this seemed to be very, very common. So there was a lot of exercising. There was a lot of people visiting with one another. There was a lot of people laughing and telling stories and telling jokes. All of that stuff's incredibly important. And as far as diet, and I do think, and I don't know if this was intentional, I feel it probably is, a lot of that is conveyed in that Netflix series. Like there was a lot of these other things are going on and are important, but it almost seemed like a bait and switch thing. Sort of like, I'm going to show you all these things that are 100% true and valid and real and make sense, and then I'm going to throw this diet thing in. But you already trust me, so this must be real too, right? I really got that sense. When we get to the diet, here are the two things that I think are incredibly important. Forget what the food is for a second. Just as important as what the food actually is the fact that there were no links in their food chain, like literally zero. The average meal that we ate at anybody's home, every bit of that meal, like literally every single part of that meal, was not only made by somebody in that house, but was grown, harvested, transported by somebody in that house. That goes for the cured meats, that goes for the cheeses, that goes for the breads, that goes for the olive oil and the olives. I mean, yeah, did we have some plants? Absolutely. Not very much, but we did have them. Everybody had their orchards. Everybody had pigs running around in the mountains. Everybody was butchering for themselves. Everybody was cooking for themselves. There isn't a question I could have asked at that table about the food on that table that somebody there wouldn't have been able to answer. Like literally, when did you pick it? How did you make this? I mean, these are nobody had to go up and look at a label or look at a cookbook. I mean, this is what they do. Every family. Now, again, we were with people that were not selected because they were meat heavy, right? They were just selected because they had their hands in food in very traditional ways, right? So I do think they were a really good window into what is typical in a place like this. But everybody we were with made their own cheese. Everybody we were with butchered their own animals, raised and butchered their own animals. Everybody we were with cured their own meats. Everybody we were with cured their own olives. Everybody we were with made their own olive oil. I mean, it was amazing. The biggest meal that we had, and I mean, it was I'm not saying that, I'm not suggesting or trying to paint the picture that, okay, we sat down and had one piece of cheese, one piece of prosciutto, and a couple of olives on a piece of bread. And okay, out of those 5 or 6 things, somebody made all of it. I mean, multi-course meals, like multi-course meals that lasted hours. They made every bit of it, completely 1000% from scratch. The most complex, largest meal we ate one night, and I mean, a meal that I couldn't even come close to finishing. And I love good food. All of it was delicious. I was ready to eat it all, and I just couldn't. The largest one there, the only thing on the table that somebody at that table didn't harvest, make, cure, whatever, completely themselves, was the wine. And that wine was brought by the food historian that helped set everything up, and it was made by her uncle. Like literally, that's how close it by her uncle, from grapes that he grew himself. So again, just imagine if nobody changed what they were eating, like the actual things, vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, omnivore, whatever the hell it is. And all you did was get rid of all those links to the food chain. You had the highest quality of whatever it is that you're doing. An exorbitant amount of things would change, including your health and your lifespan. I'm absolutely confident of that. So, as far as the things are concerned, what did we actually eat? We ate a massive amount of animal. And I don't want to say we ate a ton of meat. And I think there's a huge distinction there. And anybody who's heard me talk before or read the book or listened to anything, there's a big difference between when we started including meat in our diet in the past and we started including the entire animal. And they include the entire animal. And this makes a very big difference from a nutritional perspective, from an ethical perspective, from a sustainability perspective. All the boxes are checked with the way that they approach their animals. I'm sure a lot of it is just out of need and born out of decades and decades of making the most, and even hundreds of years of making the most of whatever resources they had access to. But it's carried over and it's still continuing. Every time we went to somebody's house, I don't care what village we were in, I don't care what time of day it was, the first thing that they did was they brought out a plate of homemade cheese, usually some kind of pecorino, some kind of sheep's milk cheese, and a whole bunch of cured meat. And the cured meats, things like copa or prosciutto or pancetta, all of these things in every case were made in-house from their own free-ranging pigs that were eating acorns and olives and running around up and down the side of the mountains. And that every time, the first thing offered to us was meat and cheese everywhere. What I think is really interesting, and I don't want to let the Blue Zone people off the hook, but I do think it's worth mentioning, is we'd been there for a while. We've eaten all these meals. The first meal we had was on a Sunday night. It was a big barbecued sheep. It was half a sheep that was on the spit. They love spits. They have spits and outdoor barbecues. They have this half a sheep spinning, and all the intestines were wrapped around the rest of the spit spinning too. And we sat down and ate this, and it cooked all day long. And then we sat down and had this big meal, but the main center of the meal was this sheep and the sheep's intestines. And we ate all this, and then again, cured meats, cheeses, and all these other things for days and days and days. And then I finally said, listen, how many days a week do you eat meat? And they said, 1. I said, wait, 1? I've never eaten this much meat in like months. Like, we've had meat every single day. What do you mean we eat meat once a week? So, yeah, we eat meat once a week. When we did the big sheep over the this is through a translator, but anyhow, over the barbecue. I said, yeah, but what about what we ate 3 minutes ago, or what we had yesterday, they didn't. I don't know if it was something lost in translation. I don't know what it was. When I said, how many days a week do you eat meat? That act of eating meat was almost synonymous with saying, when you take the entire day and barbecue half a sheep. Like, not the cured meat that you put out. So I don't know. It would have been the same thing if I said, how many days a week you barbecue over the grill, over an open fire. Right. That would have been the sort of, the answer once a week. So I do wonder if part of this larger complexity is somewhat lost in translation, or the way that, different ways that people think about some of it. But we ate the majority of the food that we ate came from animals. And in fact, and some of the people there, depending on what their role was, depending on what part of the food system they were in, it would be even more. So, for example, when you take and make certain cheeses, and you take the milk, you heat it up, it's fermenting because it's raw, and they're making most of the cheese, in the mountains anyhow. So, and you add the rennet and create the curd and cut the curd. There's 2 primary proteins in milk that we care about in the cheese making world. One's casein, and almost all cheeses are made with casein, cheddar, whatever, Monterey Jack, whatever it is, that's the casein proteins that are doing their thing. But the whey that comes out of it, right? That whey is filled with proteins too. And one of the reasons we have whey protein powder as a thing is because it's the byproduct. Somebody's trying to figure out a way to use the byproduct from the cheese industry, which is massive amount of this greenish liquid filled with whey protein, and they make whey protein powder, and everybody buys whey protein powder. But real ricotta cheese, ricotta means to recook. So when you're making certain cheeses, when you get the whey out of it, and if it's at the right pH and you heat it up, all the whey proteins form this like cloud-like thing and come to the surface, and that's ricotta cheese. The shepherds that are in the mountains are dealing with the animals all day long. One of the first things they do in the morning is they milk the animals. They take that milk, they start making cheese, and that cheese ends up becoming usually an aged cheese. So you make that cheese, you get the curds, you have those things draining, and you have all this whey, and you heat that whey up, and all the whey proteins come out, and they have ricotta cheese, and they eat ricotta cheese every single day. So we're talking about, one segment of the population is eating a massive amount of ricotta cheese literally every single day. And that's, huge animal, but it's not necessarily the front leg of the animal, but it's an animal-based food that is the basis of their diet.
Wow. That is absolutely fascinating. I'm still a little confused. Like, how are these people tracking their calories and their macros? Like, what are they doing there? How many calories a day do they eat?
I forget who I said this to. I think it was Anthony. But again, just for as weird as coming from a modern Western perspective on how we think about food and diet and health and exercise and longevity and all of this, there's a couple of things that if you told anybody, you need to get in shape, the two things that they would probably do is join a gym and hire a nutritionist. Like those are the two things they would do, right? Or hire some kind of a diet coach or health coach or something, tell them how they should be eating. The two things that I didn't see anywhere at all in one of the healthiest populations in the world are gyms and anybody asking anybody what they should be eating. There were no tracking of macros. Nobody had their phone out with an app saying, hey, there was no Weight Watchers. There was none of that. No, they didn't give a second thought about it. I mean, how beautiful. I wish, as you know, I grew up a very heavy kid and battled weight my entire life. And I think mentally, I still do on a daily basis. I very rarely, and I come from I'm a product of the 70s and the 80s where I used to have a calculator and a piece of graph paper. Every Sunday night I chart out my diet for the week and how much protein and literally down to the point something grams of fat and all of it. My entire life, if somebody puts down a plate of food in front of me, I don't see food. I see a whole bunch of calories and fat and protein and carbohydrates and whatever else is, the hot, button topic parts of food at the moment. I rarely have sat down and looked at a plate of food and done exactly what our ancestors have done and literally just used my senses. I talk about it all the time, it's how it should be, but the reality is I can't free myself to look at food and see food. I look at food and see all these other things that whoever's telling me now on social, whatever it is, like I see that. If I'm trying to be low carb now, I think about how many carbohydrates are in it. How beautiful is it that you have an entire population, the healthiest population in the world, some people would suggest, you put down food in front of the people at the table and they see food and they smell food and they taste food and they feel food and they use their senses to figure out how much they should be eating, when they should stop eating, when they should start eating. I mean, that is a beautiful thing that I wish we all had. I wish I had it.
Yeah, it's incredible. It creates this sensation of longing. Like I feel like I want to belong to that group, but it's so far gone and so far away that it's a real shame. And I want to go back to something you said earlier. I think this is really important. You've answered this question before. I love asking the question. The two best answers I ever got were both archaeologists. So I asked Dr. Mickey Bendor, who I absolutely love. His work also just creates this complete longing of how we evolved and how we should be and how we're just absolutely not. And I asked him, are we omnivores? And he said, yes. But we specialize. It's not like it's a 50-50 split. We specialize mostly animal. We can eat plants. I ask you the same question. Are we omnivores? Yes. However, plants have to be prepared in any certain way. Now, I enjoy the carnivore diet. I like it. If people want to do it, I can help them with it. But when people ask me about food, my favorite answer is what you've taught me about food. And that's how I respond. It's that, yes, we can eat lots of different things. You can eat plants. That's totally fine. Lots of people are very, very healthy and eat plants. But if you want to do it the right way and not get in trouble down the road, there needs to be some preparation. Something needs to happen. Can you elaborate on that?
100%. And let me, if we talk from an archaeological perspective, and again, I may have mentioned this to you on a podcast in the past, but it's very relevant to this. And when somebody asks me a question like that, or a whole host of questions, people, depending on the person the person you're asking the question of, depending on what their specialty is, they default to something to try to problem solve, right? To me, I default to the archaeological record. I default to what I've seen with my ethnographic field work. I default to the past, very traditional approaches to food. So with a question like that, my default is, okay, how have we dealt with plants and animals in the past for millions of years, for hundreds of thousands of years? And this, I think, is the easiest way to perceive this large, complex question. If you look at the technologies that our ancestors for millions of years have created to introduce animals into our food system, into our diets, almost every single technology has something to do with getting the animal, right? Overcoming our physical limitations and making atlatls and bows and arrows and boomerangs and throwing sticks and spears and fishing nets and hooks and traps and all sorts of things that allow us to capture an animal at a distance, right? But once we have that animal, you have a pile of incredible nutrition that, other than a sharp knife, a sharp edge, it's going to be made in less than a second with the right kind of rock. You don't have to do anything to it. Like, cooking helps a little bit with making it a little bit more, the nutrients in red meat a little bit more accessible to our bodies, but in a very negligible amount. Otherwise, the blood, the fat, the organs, all of that animal has, you can just dive, as soon as you can open it up, you can dive into it, eat it, and get a massive amount of incredible nutrition that your body doesn't have to work very hard to get the nutrients out of to where it needs to be in your body. So almost all the technologies for millions of years that had to do with animals in our diets had to do with getting the animal. Plants are the exact opposite. Up until the agricultural revolution, which is completely different. I mean, the amount of input, fossil fuels, tractors, storage, all those things that we do, grinding grains, all those things we do to process plants. To plant plants is massive, right? Preparing fields, harvesting crops, all that. Don't think about that. The majority of our existence for the millions of years up until the agricultural revolution, almost every single technology developed for including plants in our diet didn't have to do with getting the plant. I mean, hell, it's easy to get a plant. You pick the leaf, you pick the fruit. I mean, maybe you have a simple digging stick to get at a root, but otherwise you don't need anything. You're just collectively foraging. Almost all the technologies around plants accomplished one or both of these two things. One, even though plants do have nutrition in them, the nutrition is often locked away and very difficult for our body to access without a whole bunch of digestive work and a whole bunch of energy, or that nutrient isn't in a state for our body to be able to access it whatsoever. A great example is niacin in maize or corn. It has to be nixtamalized. It has to be chemically changed for that niacin to be made available to the human body. So one thing that we developed technologies around was getting nutrients available to us. And the second thing, and I think even more important, is making those plants safe to eat, right? Detoxifying those plants to the point that they're not going to make us sick. They're not going to kill us. They're not going to build up toxins in our body over time or whatever it is. So if you want to eat an ancestrally appropriate diet, which I think we should be, because it is that diet or those diets that literally built us as humans, right? When we first appeared 300,000 years ago, that's, at least in my mind, a foundation for the way that we probably should be eating at some level to nourish these very old bodies, even though we're in a modern world. Focus on animal-based foods, and I don't mean meat, I mean the entire animal. And if you're going to include plants in your diet, which I do believe is ancestrally appropriate. Now, some people would argue with whether or not we have to eat plants, and I don't think we have to. And some people would argue with whether we should at all, and they're very valid arguments. Just because we ate them in the past doesn't mean we should be eating them now, right? I mean, there are sometimes we ate them in the past because we couldn't get an animal. Sometimes we ate them in the past because we just like the taste. There's a lot of reasons why. It doesn't mean we should be doing it now. If you are going to eat plants, though, you have to be very careful about which plants you eat, what you do to those plants, and to ensure that they are as safe as they can be, and the nutrition that is in them can actually get to where it needs to be in our bodies. Otherwise, just eating plants, having that mindset that some plants are, the media is telling me some plants are good, so a whole bunch of plants must be even better for me, and shutting off your brain and just eating plants and eating plants and eating plants is actually going to get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I think about your case and the trouble you got into with oxalate. And it's like, yeah, if I was eating spinach when it was, ripe and ready to go for a week in a year, like that probably wouldn't have been a big problem. But now we have these foods available all the time, 365 days out of the year in every part of the globe. Like you can get mangoes in, the Netherlands. Like you shouldn't be able to do that. And so I love that context. I really appreciate that you wanted to go there. Okay, so 5 different blue zones, right? So you're talking about Sardinia. Have you been to the other 4, by the way?
No, I mean, I've been to Costa Rica well before I was doing any sort of research like this at all. I haven't been to the other. I've been to Greece, but I haven't been to exactly where. So I don't want to speak out of line because I don't know. But I did just spend time with Mary Ruddick at the conference last week, who I don't know if you know her very well.
I was going to bring her up on this podcast. I just listened to her episode on Peak Human with Brian Sanders, and her whole experience in Okinawa was amazing to hear.
She is brilliant. Let me tell you, not only is she, I know we were talking a little bit earlier about, people being welcoming and kind and nice in this community. She is truly one of the nicest people I've ever met, and caring and giving, and just wants to share her knowledge and her expertise. But she is truly brilliant and so well traveled. So yeah, she's great. But she has a lot to say about the other places I haven't been.
Okay, perfect. Well, we had her scheduled back in 2022, and we had to cancel because she was globetrotting all over the world. So we're definitely going to forgive her for that. And her insights were absolutely amazing. Okay, so we're not talking about the other blue zones, so not the original 4 that they identified. The 5th one that Dan Buettner later, quote unquote, identified in Loma Linda, California. Not, in my opinion, not a blue zone. Anyway, you've been to a lot of other places in the world. Like,
Right.
Why was it these 4 places? Haven't you been to lots of other places around the world where people live long and incredibly successful and healthy lives?
Oh, 100%. In fact, I don't know what the number is right now for longevity, but in the 1970s, if you watched a yogurt commercial, right, and that's when Dannon was trying to make it. First of all, think of how weird it is to try to, we were just talking about the maggot cheese when we started this conversation. One of the things in food that's very difficult to do is introduce something completely new into a diet. Like it's very, we see it with kids all the time, but even somebody, I'm sure people that will only eat meat and potatoes, and the idea that you're eating something else is very foreign and never going to have it. Flavors and textures and things are very weird to introduce to somebody when they're dead set in their ways, especially an entire community or an entire group of people. So imagine how difficult it was for Dannon to try to introduce this weird, sour, milky thing to the United States in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, there was nothing like it in the diets. So there was a huge campaign. They launched this massively huge campaign. Now, we're several generations into people eating yogurt and thinking it's healthy, and actually, in real yogurt, absolutely, I think it's an amazing food. But we're several generations into it. But think about it in the 1960s and 70s. Here's this weird milk sour thing that you maybe can put something on top. It was very weird, very, very difficult to introduce. So they had this huge campaign, and they focused it on the Republic of Georgia. At that time, the Republic of Georgia I think they had the largest amount of centenarians, or people living over the age of 100. And it's so fascinating because there's so many parallels with this blue zone stuff. Is they said, oh my gosh, the one reason that everybody in Georgia is living so long is because they eat this yogurt called Matsoni yogurt. Like, think about it. The entire reason everybody's living so long is because of this yogurt. And anyhow, they push it and push it and push it. If you go on YouTube and look at some of these old commercials, there's always a picture of some old person from Republic of Georgia eating this yogurt. Same thing though. We spent when I was filming The Great Human Race, we were in Georgia for a while. In fact, I absolutely love that country. I cannot wait to get back to Georgia. It was one of the favorite places that we went. They have an incredibly long, first of all, they make, maybe this is the link, the oldest example of wine in the world right now is in Georgia. In fact, let me tell you, give me 2 seconds. This is a super fun story. When we landed, everywhere we went to when we filmed the show, you can imagine that they had, National Geographic had just like pelican cases and equipment and drones and cameras and all tripods and all these massive amount of things. And every country we went to, you had to we had to sit there for hours because they had to like check the serial numbers of everything, especially then with drones and things. And they checked it in, and when we left the country, they had to check it all out. So we'd sit there in the airport forever. Well, we get into Georgia. Georgia didn't care about anything. So we get there and we go up to the passport control, and I hand this woman at passport control my passport. And I remember exactly how it went. She grabs my passport and she opens it and she looks at it and she puts it down and she picks up her phone. And I couldn't see what she was doing exactly, but I could see she was on Facebook. So I'm thinking, what is she doing on Facebook? I'm finally going to get through, into this country faster than, and she's like stolen and she's on Facebook. Is she like checking everybody out on Facebook? Is she Facebook stalking people? And I didn't know what she was doing, but I was starting to get a little bit annoyed. So she was on there for a couple minutes and she puts it down and she picks up my passport and she stamps it. And what she did next, forever imprinted in my mind. With her left hand, she hands me the passport. With her right hand, she reaches behind her, and I didn't even see that it was there. She grabs a bottle of wine. This is at passport control going into a new country, and hands me a bottle of wine and my passport and says, "Welcome to Georgia." And then I looked behind her, and there was a wall of wine. I'm like, what is this? They have an incredible wine culture there. They have the earliest example of wine. Something like 80 or 90% of the people, and this is about 6 years ago, but still in the country, still make all of their own wine. Like they do it in their house. Wow. They bury these things in their yard. So anyhow, there's all this wine. Maybe there's a link between wine and longevity. I don't know. But we're in Georgia. Food in Georgia is absolutely incredible. They have amazing cheeses, same kind of thing. They have this incredible, so they have a strong fermented dairy part of their diet. So lots of yogurt. I was able to have some of the Mazzoni. It wasn't like as big of a thing as they were talking about in the commercials, but it was there and it was actually a thing. Lots of nose to tail approaches to animals as well. And that was the reality of what their food system is. Like traditional foods in everywhere in the world have several things at their core. A complete nose to tail approach to animals. Fermentation is essential for just about every part of their foodway, whether it's dairy, when they do include vegetables, the vegetables at some level are almost always fermented. This is and fairly high fat, high fat percentages in their diets. And I know I've told you this before in earlier sessions, but so the people in Sardinia were, beautiful in every way. They're beautiful in like just this human sense, just amazing, welcoming, happy, awesome in every way. Again, this is anecdotal, but from the traveling that I've done, if you were to say to me, and I do not know the numbers for longevity, but if you were to say to me, who were the healthiest people you ever saw anywhere in the world, it would have been the Samburu warriors that I was with in Kenya that literally live off of blood and milk every day. Like that is their diet, blood and raw milk. And everything about them just emitted this incredibly positive, I don't mean like this kumbaya tree hugging emitting energy. Literally they were just beautiful people. The way that they stood, the way that they were with each other, their skin, their stature, their bodies, their eyes, their teeth, everything. Just to me, I'm like, that's human. Like that is what we're all trying to get to be. That. And what do they eat? Blood and raw milk every single day. And I think I told you this before too, but when I came back here to Maryland, I was, I was teaching at the time at Washington College. I forget the conversation we were having or the context, but there was a big meeting, and it was people from the school, but it was an academic thing. It was from outside of the school too. And it was a big meeting with all these important people. And we were talking about how we were going to feed this growing population, worldwide stuff. And everybody's talking about how we can GMO corn more so we can put more corn plants together and produce more corn and all these other sorts of things. And I finally was like, whoa, I was just with the healthiest people. So I'm in Maryland. I was just with the healthiest people I've ever seen on the planet. And there's two things they eat every day. And of the two things that they eat every single day, one of them is illegal for me to get, and the other one is almost impossible for me to get here. And we're sitting here having a conversation about GMO corn to feed the planet and make people healthy. And the two things that they eat are literally impossible for anybody in this room to get. I mean, that's how far off our conversations are, when we're talking about what does it really mean to nourish the human body.
This is my whole gripe. This is why I've really tried to go on the offensive with all of this, is because this documentary, it's really well made. It's beautiful. It has lots of amazing takeaways. And the problem is people are going to watch it and they're going to know that a plant-based diet is the absolute best thing for them and their health. It's so enticing. It feels good. You think you're doing so much good on so many fronts. And it's so interesting to hear other people have other sides of the story that are saying, like, no, it's actually not really like it there. And so I really appreciate that perspective. I appreciate the perspective of other places you've been in the world. Like, I often wonder, like, why was it these four and not another different four? There were other places that had, obviously vastly different diets. Why wasn't it the Inuit? Why wasn't it people in Africa? Like, they just seem to be ignored. They're not going to make it into this documentary that everybody's going to watch, and they're going to walk away thinking that they need more spinach in their life. And so I appreciate that perspective. I want to talk about Modern Stone Age Kitchen before we go, but before I do have one more question. Did they, like, as far as obviously you weren't there for this, but like in Sardinia, do people talk about like this film crew that came in and like filmed us and show plant-based stuff? Like, are they aware of that kind of thing?
They are. So some of them are. They are aware that their pitch to the world is this population of very old people that are doing really well, and it's true that part is absolutely true. And in fact, when you come in to Villa Grande, there's a sign. They still hold the world's records for the most amount of males living over 100 years old, which is a very, very big deal. I mean, it's typically a woman, right? So that's a very big deal. They're obviously aware of all that. They didn't know, but the people I was with didn't know about the Netflix piece, but they knew who Dan Butner was, and they had the family we were living with had just been interviewed for a BBC special, probably I would imagine very similar, and they were lamenting. They were, again, this is through a translator, so but everybody can bond around food, so it's great. They were saying, I don't get this minestrone thing. Like, we hardly eat minestrone soup. Like, why are they making such a big deal? That was the one thing they were fixated on. It's like, I don't get the minestrone soup thing. Like, it's not a thing here. Not that they don't eat minestrone soup, but it's not a thing. Like, that's not a basis of their diet. And they kept bringing that up over and over again.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that insight. I really appreciate that. Man, so you go off, you leave the college, you create your awesome nonprofit, and you also create the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And it just starts out as this kind of little idea that you have that you want to kind of feed the community in this amazing way. And your daughter gets involved during the pandemic, and all of a sudden this has grown to be this amazing thing. I have so many friends who've been able to travel to you to participate and eat your wonderful food and learn so much. Tell us about the work you're doing at Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And just for the listener, if you're not watching, Bill's smile is ear to ear.
I'm so excited. It's so funny because this has taken on a life of its own, in a very, very good, amazing, positive way. And we're thrilled. It's just we're realizing that every new step, the infrastructure needed to make it possible is like exponentially more difficult than the step before. But here's the quick caveat, two things. First off, my wife and I, Christine and I, do not have a business degree, never took a business class in our life. And if we had, we would have never started this business because on paper, it doesn't make sense. But in reality, it's working, and it's working really, really well. So in the middle of COVID, and I know some of the story. Very long story short, my oldest daughter Brianna, who's now a sophomore at University of Virginia, started a sourdough bread business out of the house. And you do have to understand that I eat almost no bread. If I do, it's always sourdough, but I eat almost no bread. My wife doesn't eat much. The kids were raised with bread in their diets, but it was always sourdough. We're not a bread family, but the sourdough, as far as the way cottage laws work, so what we could legally make out of our house and sell is very little. Every state's a little different, but for us, we can make bread, we can make cupcakes, we can make cookies, we can make jam, we can make the only thing that was in line with the way that we looked at the world at all and our approach to food was sourdough. So she's like, can I start a sourdough bread business? I'm like, sure. And all of a sudden she starts a sourdough bread business that literally took off in the middle of COVID. And it was at a perfect time because you can imagine nobody in the beginning of COVID, nobody left their house, right? Nobody went to the grocery store. Everybody wanted healthy food. Sourdough was starting to become a thing. So we would deliver the sourdough bread to your door. So you could like literally not even open your door and we'd put the bag down and, it was all online and you could get the bread. And anyhow, this went on, we ended up at farmers markets. But again, I still felt a little bit of a disconnect from my true passion about food and diet and health. And here's this focus on bread. It was the only thing we could legally do out of our house. Then we had an opportunity to move into the building we're in now. And now that moving into a commercial kitchen meant we could now make food that was a little bit more in line with the way that we viewed, really incredible nourishment for humans. So Christina, my book sold. Christina left her job as the director of special ed. And then it was several months later that I left the college, and we literally founded this restaurant on the back of Eat Like a Human. Like every recipe in that book became the foundation of, well, first of all, every recipe in that book comes from the way that we fed our family forever. And then it became a book. And then we took those recipes and we started a restaurant based on all of those recipes. Now we do a lot more than that now, but we said at the very beginning, we had a very strict list of things we would always do and things we would never do. And that has been the best part. That's been the guiding force for all this. So for example, we don't use any industrial nut or seed oils. We don't use any refined sugars. Fermentation is at the core of everything that we do. Any grains that we have go through a long, slow, wild fermentation process. Any nuts, seeds, grains, or legumes get soaked, if not sprouted as well. We do a nose to tail approach to animals, and there's more, but I forget what all that is. So those are the things we always do. We never use refined sugar. We never use any industrial nut and seed oils. We never use any fake plant-based milk-like things. And anyhow, so let's see if we can make it work. And we also have a rule that everything that we serve is kind of like I talked about those tables in Sardinia. Everything that we serve is made entirely in-house. So there's no two ingredients put together outside of these walls. Now, there are like one or two things that we're still trying to get over that hump with. One is Old Bay seasoning, which has a couple of seasonings put together. So that's put together. The one nut we're really trying to crack is chocolate. We started making chocolate entirely in-house from cacao beans, but it's just a little bit. So we source the highest quality chocolate we absolutely can. But that just two things put together. But we make all of our butter, all of our cheese, we make all of our pepper, all of it. And anyhow, it's working. Like it's working. And what's awesome about it is not only are we able to feed the community with incredibly nourishing food, but we're able to put our money into people. So, think about instead of buying food where pieces of it have already been put together and the value add has happened somewhere else and then paying them for that value add, all the value add is happening inside of our building, right? We're doing it. So we get to take the money that we're not spending on it happening somewhere else and put it into people. And we've only been open for a little over 2 years. And I know I was telling you this earlier, we now have 27 people on our team and they're awesome. We have an incredible team of people and they're not microwaving food. They're making real food. So our retention is awesome. People are happy because they're actually making something. They take milk and turn it into cheese, right? They take a pig and they turn it into pepperoni, and they get to go through that entire process, understand how food is made. The other thing that I think is very important about what we do and has nothing directly to do with food is I learned a long time ago that, nourishing us as humans means a lot more than just meeting our biological needs, right? Our macros and our micros, those are all important. Don't get me wrong, but the context within which we're eating or sharing food or visiting with one another is equally as important as just what that food is. So we pride ourselves on the fact that not only do we have a fully open space, there's no walls in here other than the bathrooms, right? Like you can see everything happening in the kitchen at all times. There's no barrier between you and your food and how it's getting made. You can always ask and see and smell and taste whatever that's going on. But we're nice. Like just like in Sardinia, we're nice. You come in, we'll say hello as soon as we'll sit down and have a full conversation with you. We'll explain anything you want. If you eat food that you like and you want to know how it's made, I'll give you the recipe. Hell, I'd rather you make it yourself than and feed your family with it. So it's actually a dream coming true in so many different ways. We have no idea what's next, but we're really, really happy that it's happening right now and that the entire family's involved.
That's just absolutely amazing. I'm so glad you're so proud of what you created. And that is my takeaway from this episode, my friend. If I am taking one lifestyle factor away from this episode, it is to be nice. That is absolutely fantastic. Eat whatever you like, do whatever else you like, but be nice. Bill Schindler, man, I just to be able to chat with you again, to spend time with you in person, but also have these interviews with you. I will thank you for this every time. I don't care how sick you get of it. You were so kind the first time I reached out and we had nobody listening. We were just starting and you said, Casey, I would love to be on your show. I will never forget that. It was so meaningful to get that kind of response from somebody that I have followed for a long time and learned a lot from. And today was so fascinating. I could sit here for hours and hours and hours and hear these stories, but I just so appreciate you coming on to talk specifically about your latest travels to a quote unquote blue zone to teach us, what is actually kind of going on so people can get the right information, because otherwise it's tough, man. It's really tough. So thank you again so very much for all of your work. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you in your work?
Well, first off, thank you for having me again. It is always a pleasure and an honor to be a part of your podcast. And not only thank you for what you're doing, but thank you for how you're doing it. It's really mean. And what do you got now? 500 and what?
This is going to be like 560 or something. I don't know. Yeah, it's
amazing. Thank you. So people can find what we're doing in a couple different ways. So eatlikeahuman.com is where you can find out any information about the book, about classes, about things we're doing through the nonprofit. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Bill Schindler, so at Dr. Bill Schindler. And then as far as the Modern Stone Age Kitchen is concerned, www.modernstoneagekitchen.com. You can find out all information about the restaurant. Modern Stone Age Kitchen is how you can find us on Instagram or Facebook, social media in general. And I need to put a plug in for it. We've talked a lot about Christina. She is my rock. She is the powerhouse that makes all this happen. You can follow her at Modern Stone Age Mama.
That's amazing. We will link all of that in the show notes. I do have to say, there's some books I prefer the audio. There's some books I prefer the hard copy. The listener to the watcher, whatever, get them both. They are both awesome. It is so cool to hear you tell the first half of the story and eat like a human in your own voice and tell all of that. That was wonderful. But then to also have the hard copy so you have all the recipes there, easy to reference. You really need to do both. So I really encourage the listener to go out and get both copies. It's not a waste of money at all. They're both wonderful. Like I said, I treasure our time together. Really happy you come on our show again today. And thank you so much for all of your work. It's so awesome.
Likewise. All right. Well, we'll see you soon. I can't wait till the next time we see each other in person.
Exactly. I will see you soon. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.